Sometimes you need to take control to make a difference. That's why with FlexPath from Capella University, you're in control. Set your own deadlines and leverage your experience to move at a pace that works for you. Discover a different way forward at capella.edu.
There was a lot of things like that where you'd think, what the
From Stuff, a new 12-part documentary podcast.
He was into sex every day.
The Commune. Sex, drugs, and a guru called Bert. There are crimes, but this isn't a whodunit, it's a why-done-it.
Good God, adults agreed to this?
The Commune. Find it now on your favourite podcast platform or at stuff.co.nz/The Commune.
You've already been welcomed to Centre Point.
Something's creeping in, don't follow it down.
24 hours ago, I found out the person that I've been dating for the last 6 months is a con man.
That is my sister Emma. Andrew Tonks's lies had been so convincing, she'd invested $300,000 with him. However, the tables were about to turn on Andrew. What he didn't know was that Emma had discovered his real identity. But to get any chance of justice, Emma had to act like it was business as usual. Coming up in this series.
And that's when murder, all this stuff goes through my mind. I'm really, really scared.
I'm assuming Sarah has watched too much Netflix and figures I've been defrauding you. Couldn't be further from the truth.
That's what this was, a real-life story that seems so unbelievable, but it was actually true.
A true story that all starts with one simple swipe to the right. I'm Sarah Ferris.
And I'm Emma Ferris, and this is my story, Conning the Con.
Hello listeners, and welcome to this week's episode of The Cult Vault. I'm your speaker Casey, and a huge, massive welcome to my newest patrons, Morgan and Cherry at Crimepedia True Crime Podcast, which I absolutely love. Hello to Lizzie, who I hope to work with more in the future, and a big welcome to Shannon. Thank you for chatting with me about beautiful birds after the sudden loss of one of our cockatiels last month. I hope you all enjoyed the backlog of content with more monthly exclusives on the way. Today's episode is with Katie, who talks to us about her experiences within OneTaste. Our conversation highlights many important things that I feel I should note here. The need for more conversations with people about what healthy sex looks like and feels like, about consensual relationships, and about how to feel good in our own bodies. I can't express how much I have gone back to this conversation in my own mind, especially during the recent conversations worldwide about bodily autonomy. So without further ado, here is Katie. So hi Katie, and thank you so much for agreeing to come and chat with me today after our mutual friend Esther put us in touch. Today we are going to be discussing a group that has been explored on the show before, but in this instalment we have your female perspective. Would you like to start by introducing yourself to the listeners?
Hey, Casey, thank you so much. And thank you so much, Esther, who I hope will listen to this later. She already said she would. And so, yes, hi, I'm Katie, and I am in Austin, Texas, across the lake. And I am a therapist here in Austin. I am 40.
Do you have a specific field of therapy that you work within, or is it sort of just a generalized practice?
Yeah, I mean, I'm definitely growing my knowledge base of religious trauma and cult recovery, but I wouldn't say that's my specialization at this time. I'd say I'm more specialized with people who have disordered eating and maybe some body dysmorphia, and addiction is my background, addiction recovery as well.
Wow. So it sounds like you're sort of like a therapist with many different hats almost.
Yeah, for sure.
That's amazing. And being somebody that works in the space of helping others in recovery, is it sort of a tumultuous time for you right now, politically in that area of the world? I mean, we're only getting what the media kind of wants to portray over here. So it's difficult to know really how people are feeling over there and if it's as contentious as it appears to be. Looking on the internet, I mean, what does it feel like for you over there with this Roe versus Wade atmosphere over Texas?
Yeah, it's scary. And I think most people who believe in reproductive rights for women are very scared, very angry, and it's feeling very real, although it's not exactly real yet. I mean, it is real in Texas. Abortion is basically illegal here if you have one after 6 weeks, which is when most people figure out or make a decision around that time. So yes, it's very hard to be a therapist right now. At the moment, I'm like in a frenzy of figuring out how to keep data safe and how to have online sessions that are truly private. So yeah, it's not a good time. It's a hard time, and it's an uncertain time, as it has been for a couple of years now. But I'm glad to be, honestly, thinking about where I was when I was in the cult. I feel like I'm in the world at this point, which feels very good. Like I feel like I'm in the issues rather than in this weird bubble that is sort of not paying attention to the issues outside.
For anyone who hasn't tuned into previous episodes or hasn't heard about this group, what is the name of the movement that we're going to be discussing today?
Yeah, the name of the movement, I would say, it has kind of two names. One of them is Orgasmic Meditation, which is essentially the practice that this community of people partook in. And the other name is OneTaste, which is the company that sold it, essentially, and a lot of other things.
And could you give us a brief summary of what OneTaste is or was, who created this movement, and when and how all of those things came together, how a company was established to be able to sell these workshops in the first place?
Right. Well, I want to say that Ruin's episode, he describes it so much better than I could, because I think that he did a lot more homework in looking back at like the history of it. But I'll tell you what I understand, what I know, and I would fact check anything I say because I'm not great with dates and those history. But I believe that Nicole Daedone was the creator of what we called Orgasmic Meditation, and she was the cult leader. She was the charismatic leader on the top of all the other charismatic leaders. And she created, I don't know if she called it OneTaste at the time. I don't think that she did, but she created this movement. And I think it definitely started more as a movement, a group of people doing wild stuff in San Francisco in the early 2000s, maybe like 2000, 2005, sometime between there, maybe. And they were just doing crazy experimental stuff, like dozens of people living together in very close quarters, having all sorts of sex, having a lot of open relationship, and doing this practice, Orgasmic Meditation, which I should probably describe, just because you can say to me, I say Orgasmic Meditation, I know exactly what that means, and nobody else knows what that means. Orgasmic Meditation is a 15-minute partnered practice. I'm going to try to not use the lingo. Let me just try to say this without using the lingo. So two people sit down in sort of a soft space, and the woman, there's somebody with a clitoris who is sort of receiving the stimulation, we'll say the genital stimulation, and they basically lay down and present themselves to, it's usually a man who is stroking their genitals. This conversation is moving very quickly, by the way. Hi, Casey. Good to meet you. This is Orgasmic Meditation. Oh, boy. So essentially, the person who is stroking the genitals is doing that for 15 minutes. And there's sort of a communication that's happening throughout that period of time about the basics of, how the stroking is going, whatever the person with the clitoris is wanting or not wanting. You do that communication, you do the same 15 minutes, like this essentially the same thing happens every time, start, middle, finish.
So do you have any idea of how Nicole Daedone came up with the practice of Orgasmic Meditation, or I know that sometimes it's shortened to that acronym. It can't just be something you wake up one day and think, I think it would be beneficial for two people to take part in this 15-minute session where this stimulation happens and the communication is present in this way. It feels like something that is kind of shaped over time.
I do not believe, actually, I know, according to Nicole, she did not actually make the practice up. Somebody asked her to do it at a party, and she did it. And then she took it and ran with it. And I think she created more structure. And I think that structure changed over time. I think there was a point in time when the ohms were incredibly long. Eventually it was shortened into this 15-minute snippet that I think that she felt she could sell to people as a practice to do regularly. And she could have everybody in her crew do themselves all the time. Very, very frequently.
And by that you mean run the workshops or use the practice on themselves in a kind of solo stimulation?
No, do the practice. It's always two people who do that practice, but essentially be able to do that practice. It was woven into our whole lives, and she essentially told people to weave it into their lives every day.
Right. Okay.
Yeah.
So what do we know about Nicole Daedone as a person? What do you think contributes to her having a cult of personality or a charismatic personality?
I don't know Nicole very well. I never, as most people would say, I was never in her inner circle at all. No one in Austin, where my community was really in her inner circle. People would come to visit for periods of time, maybe weeks or so max, and they were in her inner circle. But I only know what she reported, what she shared in the classes that I took where she was teaching. And I think that in some part of her world there was sexual trauma. I think that her father was the pedophile, and I think he was in prison for that. And I also think that she believes a lot in female empowerment, and I think that was something for her that was healing, and that she felt compelled to bring to the masses and wanted to watch that happen in her eyes for a lot of other women, a lot of other people. So female empowerment, sort of having sexual relations revolve around the female, and essentially maybe do some controlling of the man. This is so heterocentric. I realize this whole practice is completely heterocentric, and also cisgender centric. So I think that she wanted to empower women, and she wanted to put men in their place, and that was healing for her. And like most cults, she's very charismatic, very powerful, very articulate, very intuitive. And those are the nice things I would say about her. And she, like most cult leaders, she wanted to make a world that reflected the healing of her trauma.
That's an incredible summary that you've just given us of and insight into this matriarch of OneTaste. And it's interesting that you mentioned the sexual trauma, because that was going to be something that I asked later on. The empowerment that women must feel during some of these workshops, if they are done on the way that they were promised on paper or in workshops, where any of the kind of the trauma or negativity that we discussed today is obviously not mentioned in these presentations and promotions of these workshops. And even in episode 126 with Ruwan, when he spoke about his involvement, he said it was empowering for him as well. He'd never been in an environment where it was female focused in the way that OneTaste was. So for you to mention that a lot of the practices could be based on previous trauma that the leader had experienced is interesting in itself, I think, especially when you consider some of the subject matter that Ruan mentioned towards the end of the episode around actually abusing members of the group, which kind of makes OneTaste feel like it goes in a full circle from sort of Nicole's childhood through to how Ruan's episode ended.
Mm-hmm.
At your point in life, when you come across OneTaste, whichever way we refer to it today, what had happened in your life to lead you up to that point? A lot of the time on the show, we speak to second and third generation members of cults or high demand groups who are born into these things, but of course that's not the case here. So was there anything significant that you can pinpoint where you think, that was a potential factor in me kind of being swooped up into this thing, or was it kind of a very organic thing?
Yeah, I would say my beginning of being in the cult was a pretty dramatic point in my life, and I could say like a stereotypical time that people are especially vulnerable to being pulled into a cult. That maybe within weeks of me starting to be involved in the cult, I had a really traumatic breakup that I did not see coming. A 3-year relationship just boom ended. And before that relationship had started, I had also decided I was going to stop drinking. And I had my friend group at that point was basically revolving around drinking. And so when I was going into that relationship, I was losing my friendships, and I did not have much community around me. I was also really, I was very deep. I had been very deep in my work because as a therapist, I don't know if this is true over there, but as a therapist, once you graduate from college, which is pretty rigorous, you have to do like 2 to 3 years of essentially working for almost nothing and being under supervision before you're an official therapist. And so I was just in the first few years of being an official therapist and in a state of burnout. And I've never been particularly close with my family. So I was very alone and very much in pain and grieving, and looking for a family, looking for a group that I could feel myself in and feel resonant with. And that was what I found.
And how does that introduction play out? Is this a group that you were aware of already existing in your area? Was it a mutual contact, somebody on the street?
I was not aware at all.
Right. Okay. It just feels like it feels like a very strange thing. Like if somebody came up to you and said, "Hey, want to come and have your clitoris stroked for 15 minutes?" I feel like that's not the sort of thing that people can come up to you on the street to try and sell in the way that somebody might say, "Have you heard the word of God?" And you say, "Oh, I'm a faith-based person. I resonate with what you're wanting to have a discussion about." But I feel like you can't really evangelize in the same way with people on the street when it comes to workshops.
100%. Yeah, 100%. And that was definitely my initial reaction. I think the first I came into connection with just their literature on the app Meetup, which do y'all have that over there?
Maybe.
It's kind of like technology that helps you be in connection with people who have like a common interest.
Right. So if I wanted to come and play board games somewhere, I could go on Meetup and I'd be able to find a group of people that want to play board games with me.
Yes.
That sounds
So this
great. It
probably
also sounds quite dangerous, though.
so good. Yeah, in situations like this one, it can be a little dangerous. The board games one, it's probably harmless, usually, but yeah, I think the OneTaste would typically sort of the front of the shop window is not what's in the shop window is not orgasmic meditation. It's a turn-on event, like these adult games that for connection. And for me, it was women's group, which felt even safer than that. And they do mention orgasmic meditation at the bottom. We'll say, go through the whole spiel. It's a 15-minute practice, blah, 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 blah. And they'll tell you the graphic details of it in a meetup description. But to me, I was like, okay, I'm not doing that. But I do want to go to this women's group. And just, when they tell you, you will heal your relationship with your body. You will be able to achieve intimacy in relationships. You will be more connected to both women and men alike. It's just it's just like all this talk of how it will transform you. And then that was like, yeah, that's 100% what I want. Sign me up.
Yeah, that sounds like maybe, I don't know if this is entirely true. People might disagree if they're listening, but that sounds like what every woman wants from the age that they develop body image issues right up until present day. Isn't that just what maybe even every person wants, is just to feel comfortable with how they look and how they are and what they eat and how they communicate with other people, like that. Yeah. So offering you the answers to all of life's questions.
Yes, absolutely. Yeah, that was it was just speaking exactly what I needed at that point in my life. And I would imagine that most people, as they're kind of coming into the group, that's where they are.
And you said that you were sort of seeking community, friendships, family, that part of your life that you felt was missing at that moment in time. So to go to a women's group where other women are looking to heal in the same way, of course, there's kind of that insinuation that this could be where you find kinship through people that you have common interests with or common issues with, not necessarily trauma bonding, but I don't know if there's a word for something that would make people connect through the issues that they have. As a therapist, there's probably a word out there somewhere. Somebody, if you know the word, listeners, email in and let me know. So you go to this first session, and what is that like for you? How many people are there? How long does it last?
Yeah, it was a women's group, was my first event, and it was maybe 20 to 25 women. It lasted an hour and a half, I think, was what women's group always lasted. And it was like nothing I'd ever experienced before. There was so much honesty, there was so much intimacy, there was like physical intimacy, like non-sexual physical intimacy between women. There was discussion about all of these real things that we deal with, from heartbreak to relationship strain to sex to oh my gosh, so many things, that to trauma and sexual trauma. It was all talked about. And the space that was created was well held. That space was, it wasn't like nobody was getting scared of like, oh, this is outside the lines. Like it was well held. It was held lovingly. It was held without fear. And so I touched something that I couldn't walk away from at that point.
Wow, that sounds incredible. That sounds, it's so difficult when we get to these parts of people's stories where they talk about having these experiences, and then sometimes how those sessions will be sort of used against the individual later on. I don't know if that's true in your case, if the people kind of leading the workshops were taking notes at all, or kind of listening into the conversations where you're openly talking about past traumas, possibly ill mental health, all of the things that could later be used against you when you're in the throes of coercion and undue influence.
Right, absolutely. And I think later on, I was more aware of the fact that when there's a new person in the group, there's a whole bunch of back room conversation about that person between groups, large groups of people. It's like a think tank, essentially, of how do we sell this person? How do we hook this person? What does this person appeal to? Where is this person? What are their wounds? And yuck. Yeah,
it just makes my skin crawl.
Yeah. And I think there was a lot of belief that what was being sold was transformation and growth. And in some ways, yes, that's arguable. It's arguably the case for many people. And yeah, it's also coercive and really backhanded and really not transparent, very manipulative. I don't know if knowledge of what was going on would have actually even swayed me at that point. I was so immediately sold and like ready to just give everything to it, which is a weird vibe in the first place. The fact that was what I felt I needed says something about the vibe that was going on. This is like boundaryless.
It's really unfortunate as well, in the way that the product that's created from this sessions is a great product to market and safe and helpful, perhaps maybe under the guise of professionals. I'm not sure if any of the leadership were trained in understanding some of the themes and topics that some of the participants might have been discussing in these workshops. And I don't know if you would need somebody to kind of oversee it, just to make sure that, people weren't reliving past traumas and then leaving the workshops and not really knowing what to do with any of that stuff. I'm not sure what that would look like, but it's unfortunate that that's not how the sessions could stay, because that perhaps might have been all that you needed in that time in your life, without everything else that came after.
Right, exactly. And to answer that question of the training that people had, I would say of the people that I knew, I would say there were maybe 2 of us who were trained in some sort of trauma awareness, and neither of us were particularly major leaders of the community. We both had jobs. we both had work outside of the community that we loved. And no, none of these people actually knew what they were doing in terms of trauma, in terms of opening somebody up and knowing how to close things back. Nobody had a degree in psychology or in counseling or psychiatry, anything like that.
Well, that leads us perfectly into my next question. I was going to ask if you have a rough idea of how many of you were present in that session and how many people would have identified as leadership or people running the workshops, and what gave them authority to do so. Were they trained by Nicole over in New York or wherever, and then moved over to Texas, or did they go from Texas to the East Coast to spend some time over where everyone else was doing the main bulk of things? What did that look like in terms of the workshop contribution?
Right. Yeah, I'd say in that group of 20 to 25, there were probably about 6 women who would identify as leaders. And I would say all of them, or most of them, lived in the house this was like the community house where both men and women lived. And I would say what separated a leader from a non-leader was probably having completed the coaching program, which was the program alone was somewhere between $10,000 and $12,000. And that does not account for having to go to either New York or San Francisco and spend a weekend there every month for 10 months. So the final bill is somewhere around probably 20 grand, maybe more. Those folks were looked at as the exalted leaders, that the people who were in the in crowd. And yeah, many people in Austin, including myself, went through that program.
Oh, wow. So the way that you've pitched it there sounds as if, in hindsight, people are paying for status, or people are paying for a certain position within the hierarchy of Would you say that's
Definitely.
a fair assumption?
I'd say that's definitely a part of it. That's definitely a part of it. On the community level, you're definitely a big dog if you've been to the coaching program. On the personal level, I think a lot of us did the coaching program as a way to just go deeper into your own transformation and growth.
Mm-hmm. Especially
myself included.
If you believe in the work, you want to be able to provide that to other people as well, and know how to do that in the way that the teaches you to do it properly.
Right, exactly. And I don't think really anybody in the group was not interested in like healing or growing. And that was always sort of marketed as like, well, that's the thing you need to do to keep going. You know, if you really want to do this work, that's what you need to do. That'll take you there. I think that that's a lie, personally. Like, I think that was actually a lie. I don't think that I need it. It definitely taught me things. I had a rich experience. But no, I don't think that it was worth a year's worth of college tuition or more to be doing that.
When you put it that way as well, it's a lot of money. It's a deposit for a house in this country. In the area I live in, it's a deposit for a 3-bedroom house with a driveway and a big backyard.
Yeah, I hear it's like a decent car, and probably about a year of accredited college education.
And I'm guessing this coaching workshop or this coaching program, it's not something that's offered to you immediately. Is it something that comes after time, or do they kind of flirt the idea throughout various different workshops that you attend with the women's group?
You know, I think for anyone who wanted to do it immediately, they absolutely could. And I would say I did see some people come through who did just want to go straight for that and had the money and just could and did. But again, this was all methodically done. So it's like, oh, this person needs to go slow, or like this person has money. They're charged about money. I put in quotation marks because money was seen as like this energetic thing. It wasn't a real thing. It's like money's just energy. And so, you know, for me, there was very little direct conversation about it, and I would put $1 million on the fact that was very strategically done, because they just knew that I'm somebody who doesn't respond well to pressure. And so for me, that pressure came through my boyfriend at the time. I sort of connected with a boyfriend in the community pretty quickly, who happened to also be the brother of the leader of the community, who would eventually buy the affiliate of Austin. There's some pressure that came through him. And I would say just little light touches here and there about how amazing it is. And do you want to go? Everybody knew I wanted to go.
Mm-hmm.
it was just a matter of like getting me there.
Right.
And so gently.
So after this initial session where you're hooked and you're kind of feeling all in about the group that you found, is the first session free, and after you're hooked they charge you, or are the sessions free and it's the coaching programs and things that you pay for? What does is there like a subscription service?
Yeah, I think that women's group was free at that point. I think maybe later it started costing like $5 or $10. I think turn-ons cost $10. But that is all sort of getting you hooked so that you will take what was called like the How to Own course. It had a couple names through the years, but there's a $200 course. I paid like $159 for it or something. That is sort of like a half day or a whole day. Can't remember, maybe a whole day course that is teaching you how to do the practice properly. And you also watch two people do the practice in the middle of the room, which is a huge dramatic sight and scene that I will never forget. It just oof. So yeah, that's kind of the first paid thing that you do. And then of course there's always more things after that, between that and the coaching program or what have you.
So after your first women's meeting, how do things progress to the point where you go to this I don't know what
how to own
presentation? I don't know what way you would display. I don't know what's the appropriate language to use when you're talking about, such things.
Yeah. You mean the kind of doing the OM in public there in the class.
Also reminded me of when my friend went over to Amsterdam, and it's funny if she's listening to this. She went over to Amsterdam and she was like, wow, I'm going to pay to go to a sex show because I'm just really intrigued of what these sex shows are like. So she chose a mature couple to go and watch. She said that it was just like you've just said, everybody's just standing around in a circle, just kind of watching this thing play out.
Yes. Yeah. And yeah, it's a really good question of like, how do you get from just doing through your everyday life and like, yeah, of course I want some growth, to like being willing to do that. And I think the events, the women's group, there are these specifically structured games in these groups, and part of the structure is like it's an intense, intimate experience. It's basically like you're doing something that scares you. So you're revealing something that scares you. You're telling something directly to someone else, something that scares you or that you would be very taboo in the out there world where there's social norms and people are trying to be on their best behavior. And so you're basically being built up to that point of taking your pants off in a room and allowing someone to stroke your genitals with someone else watching. Because when you're in that class, there is a coach who's sitting there between your legs watching the thing happen.
Wow. That is, I tried to put myself in that situation, but as you said, it's not just something you kind of don't just jump sort of A to Z. There's a lot of stuff that happens in between. You mentioned turn-ons. What are those sessions? Are they different to the actual practice sessions?
Yeah, there's no practice. There's no OM in those turn-ons. There weren't. I don't think they exist anymore, but it's just a really specific, exact same thing that happens every time. It's 3 games, 3 like relationship intimacy building games. And they were usually in Austin, somewhere between like 10 and 20 people in that room, and they would play those games. And it was just a lot of group mentality and a lot of a lot of sort of boundaries would be broken, usually in a good way. And, you know, they're sales events. They're sales events to figure out who there is going to go on and do more.
It sounds quite similar to some of the footage that came out in the Wild Wild Country documentary around Osho and Bhagwan Sri Rajneesh, when people would go into these workshops and really just push themselves in ways that made them feel extremely uncomfortable. Nicola Ranson talked about it in her memoir, Slice of Orange, where the person she was dating at the time kind of just got undressed and then looked at her and she was like, okay. And then all of a sudden she's in this room with no clothes on, just, you know, out of her comfort zone, and then just found a way to feel confident and comfortable with it. And then over time, it just became something that was quite normal and typical for those workshops. Did you attend some of these turn-ons, and that's how you were kind of encouraged to attend the OM session, or was it when you were dating the brother at this point and he introduced you to the OM session?
No, it was even before that. I basically was, after several women's groups, I was willing to kind of venture out into another class that also had men in the room. And I was building this up of like, I was like, I do not know what sort of men are doing this practice, but I do not trust them. And I do not want to meet them or know them. I'm good with just hanging out with the women. And there was a class called, I think it was called The Art of Intimacy. And we did all these games. We like shuffled around the room, and then you would like whisper a secret in 3 people's ears. And I like did that, and I really like pushed my comfort zone and did like this long, like a minute or more of just prolonged eye contact with somebody, which has always been something that's very intense for me to do. And so, yeah, at the end of that, you're in a certain state that causes you to make extreme decisions, and that is when the sales team whomps on you. That's when the sales team comes over and offers you the intro to OM class, and that's when I bought it. Was after that class. Yeah.
So during these OM sessions, workshops, the men stay fully clothed. There's no sexual gratification in terms of sort of physical release for the man in these sessions,
right?
Because it's hard to know if people are paying for these sessions and the women are kind of allowing their bodies to be stimulated in such a way, or receiving stimulation in such a way, then I'm sure that there's a way to look at it where it could be viewed as sex work or prostitution.
That's a good question. I don't know if I've ever heard anyone frame it in that way. I think the reason that it hasn't is because, well, this is for the woman. This is the woman receiving something. And also I think things were set up financially so that besides the How to OM course, there was no money exchanged except for in that class. Okay. And you did not have to OM in that class. That was made pretty clear, even though you kind of, after that day, you kind of wanted to be a badass and do it yourself instead of being like, no, I went to all that trouble, but I'll maybe do it later for my first time or something. But yeah, I mean, probably the financial piece is like there's not real money being given or taken around an actual OM. That would make it not quite sex work, probably, maybe. Does that make sense?
Yeah, absolutely. It was just kind of a thought that I had around how, when creating the company and detailing what how the money is made from the company, I'm sure that they had to be very clever in the way that they worded things in sort of a legal sense, but from the tactics that have been used already, you just mentioned there that the sales team were coming down on you when you were in like a trance-like state. So I'm not surprised that is just such a high level of intellect going into how to make these how to make this movement foolproof in the way that it was. A lot of nefarious practices coming through in this episode, and it's really fascinating for me to hear your perspective as somebody that experienced it from the female point of view. So the sales team, they dive on you, and you pay the money, and then you go to your first session.
Yeah. And then the madness really began. And it's like the next level of intensity. And, watching people ohm in a room full of people just watching, I would say was one of my first experiences of real blatant like dissociation of like, this is way too much. This is way beyond what I'm capable of like processing in the moment right now. And over the years, I probably watched, what did they call it? A demo. They called it a demonstration. And I probably watched 50 of them over the years. I was around for 5 years, and it wasn't until maybe the last 5 that I was even in the room.
Wow.
They're just too much. It's too much. There's so much intention put into it, and there's so much in the room that's like, it's too overwhelming. And some people really enjoyed them, and that's what got me part of the thing that got me about the practice and would make me feel like I hadn't grown enough is that some people were in that room and they were like, this is real cool, like they were in their bodies, and they weren't freaking out like I was. And you would run into people like that, and you'd be like, okay, I'm not sexually free. I have so much work to do. Like there are certain people who are so much more comfortable with this wacky experience. And so, more fodder for the fire to keep going.
Do you feel like now, when you reflect on those situations or through your journey of sort of deconstruction after this 5-year misadventure, do you feel like people were saying that because that's what they thought they should be saying, because it appears progressive, it appears empowering for the woman? It's like pushing boundaries in terms of like being prudish and bringing sort of sex into the forefront where it's still quite taboo. Like I'm clearly a little bit uncomfortable sort of trying to work out what is the correct terminology to use to make sure that I'm not being crude about the subject, or making sure that I'm trying to remain sensitive towards you as an individual when we're discussing your body in an intimate way, and the individuals that you came to call your family as well. It's important to remember that. But at the same time, talking about female masturbation and things like that is not something that people have in these everyday conversations. So do you feel like people are saying, wow, this is so cool, it's just what people thought they should be saying in those situations to appear normal or to appear cool and relaxed?
Maybe. Maybe. I mean, I think something I learned through being so connected with so many people through intense experiences is that I'm not a person who at that point had like a shutdown valve of like, this is too much and I know how to check out kind of thing. It's like I did not have that defense, which made this experience really overwhelming, especially going into the coaching program, way too overwhelming. And I think you had to do that. Like if you didn't have that, you were really in a state of stress for most of the experience. And I think that some people were like me in that way, but many people just had ways of shutting down, you know, sort of blocking parts of the experience so that they weren't so overwhelmed. And I think I have that now. I think the pandemic has taught me that actually. It's like we're so stuck. We are so stuck. It had to shut down. Like I had to figure out ways to shut down, you know.
I imagine that there's significant stress on your sort of mental health, well-being and psyche as well, if you're going into these demos over and over and over again and just experiencing this same sort of heightened level of stress or out of bodiness. That can't be healthy for anybody to experience on a you know, not just on a single level, but on a repeated basis.
Yeah.
And there's so much that I want to ask you about this first workshop that you went to. And also I had a thought that perhaps if people were coerced into thinking that they wanted to be the people that led the demos or were involved in the demos, but then years later have realized that that's actually not what they should have been doing for themselves, that's really scary to think about, that there could be individuals that are having those thoughts and feelings. I hope that that's not the case. And in this session, when people are standing around saying, oh, wow, this is really cool, is there just casual chit chat happening as this 15-minute demonstration plays out?
No, definitely not. It's definitely like you know, the practice and the people who were doing it were very much respected, but it was also it was very contained, very controlled. And no, it was a gripping 15 minutes for sure.
And the female stays fully dressed apart from the sort of the
waist down.
Yeah. And do you just see this woman in the full throes of like orgasm?
Good question. So in the practice of orgasmic meditation, it's pretty rare that there's an actual climax, which is really deceiving because most people say orgasm is climax. Nicole had a philosophy that female orgasm is not climax. It's a lot of shifting and ups and downs and a lot of feelings going on, but climax is not necessarily a part of that at all. And so it was part of the practice is to not try to have a climax, or we didn't use the word orgasm because we use that to mean like something spiritual. Everything was about orgasm, but that didn't mean climax. So I think it's important to state the fact that most people or most OMs did not lead to a climax. For some people they would. That's just how some women's bodies work. And for most women, that wasn't a part really of the practice on a regular basis.
Okay. I don't think I asked you on that question, so that's kind of clarified a lot for me in that situation. I'm not sure if in my mind I just pictured tables of women being stimulated by men and just lots of moaning and thrashing around going on, and you know, women just having orgasms.
That's pretty true.
All in the same room.
Yeah,
Okay.
the moaning and the sound effects, that is pretty common depending on the room and the level of experience. When you go into the coaching program, there's 150 people in there, so there's 75 nests of people. It's just
oh my goodness.
Yeah.
When you first went to this first workshop, there's that many people in the room watching this?
No, that was the intro to OM course.
Right.
I think in my class there were maybe 25 students or something like that would be
right. Okay. Right. So you've paid for this session, you attend it, you're not really present throughout, but then you're supposed to be then trained in how to deliver these or participate in these workshops in the correct way.
Yes, to be able to do the practice on your own, where you just go up to Jimmy and say, would you like to OM? And you guys find a space in his apartment and you OM, and then you go home, and how to do that in a way where you don't get into like the pitfalls of starting a relationship because you just had a sexual experience, or basically just doing this practice as a random practice that's would be like meditating together.
Okay, right. So this is where things get really tricky, I think, because this is where there's the potential for people's emotions and relationships to be weaponized.
I think that the way that humans work emotionally was sort of weaponized at that point, because it is natural to, because you've just had an intimate experience with somebody, and they might have a girlfriend in the building, and they probably, many of them did, if you were going to the Ohm house to like the community house to have an Ohm, the door might have been answered by their girlfriend, or and so all sorts of things could be happening at that point. But you were made to feel wrong if you wanted something more, or if you wanted to have some sort of an old, a traditionally like conventional sort of thing around the Ohm, like you wanted to hang out for a while, or you were growing a relationship with that person, that I think that became sort of counterintuitively taboo, because it was quote unquote conditioning, relationship conditioning, and that anything that was like traditional relationship dynamic was totally you wanted to just throw that out the window and do the opposite thing.
Right.
And at that time it was open relationships. So yes, that's really intuitive, that you're like, oh, their longtime girlfriend could be in the building. Yes, that happened a lot, and is really screwed up.
It's kind of similar to information in Helen Zuman's book Mating in Captivity, where she talks about Zendik Farm having a radical take on sex and relationships, where you used to have to ask, or where she would ask people in positions higher than her, based on the color of the wristbands that they all wore, if she could have a date with somebody that she would like to have a date with. And a date meant a sexual interaction, where they would go to a designated space and have sex with one another. So that person would then go to the potential date and say, Helen would like a date with you. And that person can either say, yeah, okay, or no, thank you. These people might be in relationships, but if they're seen, so the relationships are discouraged, but they still happened. And if one person is repeatedly going on dates with the same person, what you've mentioned there about how the commune or the community would see that as a really negative thing and apply a lot of negative words to that situation is very much what happened in Zendik Farm.
Yeah, I mean, I'm sure that term was thrown around in a lot of different ways. And I think as you spoke about that dynamic that was working in that coercive group, it's like, I was thinking about the dynamic in the OneTaste community, and it was like, it needed to be reminded to you that this practice made you, and you needed to do the practice, and you needed to contribute to the community. And if your relationship you were cultivating with that person was going to get in the way of that, you needed to be schooled, and then somebody was going to try to control your relationship, so that you got back on track of like, the community and this group is your first priority.
That's so scarily similar to Helen's experience.
When you said the date, we had the exact same thing. We called it a makeout, and it could mean sex, it could mean literally making out, it could mean anything. You just called it you asked for a makeout, and then you would go off and do whatever y'all decided to do.
It's very similar. It's
weird.
Yep, and Wolf Zendik had this idea that they were going to cleanse the world, and they had all this terminology for people outside of the group. You've been to this session, you've decided that you're going to fully invest into the OneTaste community. Is this where you meet the brother and you become involved romantically? And how long is it before you go to take part in your coaching program?
Yeah, that's when I started my daily practice. I was like, I'm going to do this every day, and did. And yes, and then I met him, and we pretty quickly became regular partners first. And pretty quickly became more involved than that. I had there were many people who were active in the community. So it was like, I probably had somewhere between in any given week, I'd have between 3 and 10 different partners that I would practice with. And most days I was doing 2 ohms a day. I was traveling all around Austin to do these because I was not doing them at home. I had a roommate who was not down with that. And yeah, so I was doing that for about 6 months before I started the coaching program.
It sounds like the start of less free time, less of your own time that's not solely focused on OneTaste and the practices.
Yeah, there was a platform called the Ohm Hub. And I think that for me, the Ohm Hub was removed eventually, but during my time, I think that I used that, and then just word of mouth of like, oh, he's a good stroker. That was the word they used. He's a good stroker. You can trust him, or he's a really great guy, or he's in your part of town, or he's about where you are in the practice, or he's really experienced. And so kind of like word of mouth from the other women too. Mm-hmm.
Wow. So would you sometimes go to these sessions having never met the person face to face before?
Oh yeah.
Oh my goodness. That is
yeah, scary.
Katie, that's like, it's scary, especially because you're putting yourself in an extremely vulnerable position. But it's also really interesting that people were just taking part in this practice. Like,
yeah. No, I mean, yeah, it was all dehumanized. It was totally dehumanizing. So definitely.
So many partners in rotation, and none of these were sexual in any way, just for the Ohm practices. That was the only interaction that you had with these other people apart from the brother.
No, I would say things within a few months became sexual with a number of different people, mostly in like the leadership whatever rung of people. There, of course, there was a bunch of sex. I mean, of course, there was a bunch of sex that was happening. And it's not long before people are like, ooh, who do you want to have sex with? Who do you want to have a make out with? And there's all of that. And so, yeah, I've definitely felt pressure to do that. And I remember feeling like I'm not attracted to anybody in this community except for this guy I was dating, because there was safety between us. We were actually talking and spending time making sure we liked each other and getting to know each other as people.
But you had to be okay with him going to stroke other people's clitorises, and he had to be okay with other people coming to stroke your clitoris.
Yes. Yeah.
Oh.
Maybe that's why it didn't work out.
That's a heavy kind of. Oof.
Yeah. Yes.
So it's fair to say that sex was pretty common between many people within the community.
Yeah, especially for me in the beginning, when it was like more casual relationships with people, it was actually easier for me at that point, because it was aligned with what they were saying, which is like, this isn't intimate, this is just experimenting, this is a laboratory. And it was to me at that point. And then I got to know those people more. Eventually I would move in with them and they felt like my brothers and sisters, and I no longer felt interested in that, which isn't how everybody's story went whatsoever, but that was kind of how I felt about it.
I suppose as well, given the events that led up to you finding the OneTaste community, it probably didn't feel at that point that you wanted to find something perhaps as serious or significant as your previous relationship that ended before you found the OneTaste community. I don't know if you've reflected on that and thought about why it was easier to have those casual interactions at that time.
I mean, I think for me, and this is really even after all of this time, I really think it's just kind of how I'm wired. It's like I can have casual sex with people. And if I'm going to have intimacy with somebody, I'm going to have monogamous intimacy with them. That's where I landed. Like I tried it all.
Yeah, and I think that's a really key differentiation to make. Differentiation. Is that? I think that it's important to make that distinction, because people often speak about, one night stands and how there's no relationship there, but when you actually have intimacy with somebody, that comes with more than just the physical interaction with somebody, as you said, kind of the talking, understanding each other, talking about past experiences, commonalities, likes, interests, making plans together. That is different to just having a physical interaction with somebody. So that's the first time I've heard somebody word it in a way where I've gone, yes, that's the distinction, that's the difference. And what was your before and then up to this point, what was your relationship like with your body in terms of your sexual expression, your comfortability with sex? Do you feel like it changed significantly from your time before OneTaste and then up to this point where you're going around Austin to meet with your various partners?
From before I came into the community until that point there, yeah, probably a little bit. Yeah, I mean, really, I would say that first experience of oming and that in the intro class, it was like, that was a huge transformational moment. I was like, so much more is possible for me right now. I have so much more bravery. Like that just happened and everybody's cool with it. Like that, like, somebody literally just stared at my genitals for 2 people just stared at my genitals for 15 minutes. And then everybody was just really respectful and kind and cool. And we just moved on. There's not all this whole bunch of stuff around it. And yeah, my relationship with my body was bad, and probably like most women, maybe even worse, with dysmorphia. And I don't know if you know what dysmorphia is. It's basically feeling like your body is repulsive. I think that's just something that kind of runs in my family. And it was absolutely an issue for me coming into the practice. And in terms of my genital area, that was gone immediately. Like that was just gone immediately from starting the practice. So I definitely credit that. I think credit is earned in that way.
I suppose it's a great way of realizing that everybody's vaginas look completely different from one another. There's none two the same. I suppose that's a really quick way of realizing that, which is great. And it's great, the body positivity and the positivity around sex that comes from this practice or this switch in mentality as well. I think it's difficult to be sexually expressive without judgment in the societies that we exist in, especially, going back to where you currently are in the world, with a lot of the Bible Belt existing around the states that surround Texas, as well as Texas being obviously largely involved in Christian practices. So to be able to have that sexual expression and sexual freedom as well, that along with the workshops must be very empowering for the woman after the initial sort of lying there with 2 people. It's kind of like when I had a baby and I was just like, okay, everybody's just everybody's just down seeing there. Every part of me. And then after that, it's just kind of like, you'd just be walking around with just like an adult nappy on in the hospital room, and the doctors or nurses would come in and check, and you'd just be like, yeah, I just it's over, it's done. I don't care anymore. So that's kind of what that's reminding me of, and I'm not surprised you described that initial experience of participating in the practice for the first time as dissociating from your body, because I feel like that must be common for a lot of people.
Yeah.
Did you ever have encounters with that person that you had the initial session with ever again?
Not much, if any. I do remember him. He may have been around very briefly, but I think he was one of the many people who sort of learned it, dabbled, and then left. It was like not going to be a big thing in his life.
Right.
Yeah.
And what about the coach that was observing the session?
Yeah, I definitely, I would say we haven't talked in some time, but I would say that we're still friends and we still love each other very much. And I don't think we ever actually lived together. I think she moved out of the house by the time I moved in. But yeah, we definitely had an ongoing friendship.
Wow.
Yeah. I went to her wedding and yeah.
So you've been to the introduction to Om, you've witnessed the practice in all its glory, and you've then had the practice done to you in a session. You're then going to various partners and you're practicing Om sometimes twice a day.
Oh, yeah.
And driving all over Austin. So we're kind of now reaching perhaps that level of dependency where it's encouraged that you have Om involved in every part of your life. And then I imagine it gets to the point where you're like, I don't know how to do anything without
the
OneTaste community, or
yes.
the approval or answers to questions that I have on things that would just felt simple to me before this community. And you said that eventually you moved in. So
yeah.
do you go to the coaching program with your partner? Has he already done the coaching program because his sister's in more of a leadership role? How does that next stage of your journey play out?
Yeah, so the coaching programs had numbers. So the first one was 1, called CP1, Coaching Program 1. And my partner at the time was in CP7, and then I was in CP8. So I started mine as his was kind of wrapping up. And I was not living in the house yet. I was really attached to living with my cat, who was 13. I'd been with her for 13 years and could not take into the house. And so that was kind of a boundary for me until it just couldn't be anymore. And so that was kind of once I figured out how to kind of foster her out to somebody who would just kind of keep her temporarily while I was there, I was ready to go.
Wow. Okay. So you were already sort of a qualified coach.
I wasn't qualified. I was just so it was a very long class. It's a 10-month class, coaching program. Yes, it really drags out. So I was about 4 months in when it was like I couldn't take it anymore. Like I had to move into the house. It felt like I was starving. It felt like I didn't have support for what I was doing, like for this ridiculous program that I was taking. Like in order to do that, you have to go home to a bunch of people who have done it too, because you can't go back out into the world and just like go to your therapy job and talk to your coworkers. You can't do that. It's like whiplash. It's like it's like a clash of worlds, basically.
Right. So huge cognitive dissonance at this point. Then do you feel like you're using language at this point that, like, if we were to have a conversation, I might not even be able to really understand everything that you're saying at that point?
Oh, yeah. Yes. I mean, definitely speaking in lingo and also just living at a level of intensity and a level of like challenging oneself that doesn't translate. And yeah, there's just this whole, like, I remember I worked at a treatment center and I would go in and I would do like a 2-hour group therapy session, and I would come back out and I would look at my phone, and some days there were like over 200 unread text messages.
Oh, geez. Okay.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
And do you feel like that there was a subliminal or maybe even obvious pressure for you to move into the house, that you weren't going to reach your potential or fulfill what you could unless you were in the house and in that constant environment?
Yeah, yes. And that month of the coaching program, Nicole was mad. And she was basically like, you all are lazy. You all need to be taking this to the next level. There's a bunch of this shit going around, and y'all are not in. You guys are not all the way in. And if you want to grow, if you want to get something out of this, you all need to go to the next step. And I took that like, you know, like the voice of God. And a big part of that was because I was spending more money than I'd ever spent on anything on this, and I wanted to get the most out of it, you know? So I was like, shit, I got to do more. And the first thing, like, as she was saying that, I was like, I got to move into the house. That was my mind.
Wow.
Yeah.
So there's the sunk cost fallacy already playing a part before you've even decided to leave the group. Because a lot of the time that's where somebody might think, I can't leave because I've put all the money or time or career into this group, so I can't even fathom the idea of just walking away from it. So it's interesting that you're having that before you move into the house. And do you feel like there was a lot of fear of missing out coming into play as well? Totally. With other people that were already living in the house?
Totally. Yeah, there's so much connection in there. Complete boundaryless experience, but really also like a very connected experience of holding a house together and having all your rituals together, doing all your practices together, which is so much easier to do. Just to wake up and kind of scurry out to the living room and do your practices out there.
Do you feel like there's like an elitist mentality for people that live in the home? The people are kind of like, we're already so much further than you could ever be because we're all living in the house together, as Nicole has told us we should be?
Yeah. Sorry, I got tickle in my throat. Yeah, I would say on a local level, like in Austin, it was, and this is probably true in all the communities, but it was like the cool kids that the people who had the most connection, the people who were really getting the max benefits from this, who really had a family, lived in the house, and total fear of missing out by not getting to be a part of that experience. Because at that point, the events, like women's group was in the house, so it was like you would go to the house and you'd feel the vibe of the house, and you'd have the group in the house, and then you'd have to leave the house, you know, and then the men would be coming home and it'd be like, ew, the men too, you know, they live here too. And it would be like, you know, this sort of like summer camp. It's like you want to be the counselor, you know, the camper.
So what was the size of the house, roughly how many bedrooms, and how many people were living in the house at the time you moved in?
There were 6 bedrooms, and one of those bedrooms was an ohm room. One of those bedrooms was what was called the quad, so it had 2 beds and 4 people in those 2 beds. And then the rest of the rooms had 1 bed, and each of them had 2 people in the bed. So there were 12 people living in the house.
And you're expected not to have sex with one another but you're sleeping in beds with each other. So again, that kind of feels like an almost inevitability at that point.
I mean, you were expected to not like break out of an practice and start having sex with somebody, but you definitely were not expected to not have sex with people. It was encouraged that you have sex with people, the right people. So I mean, that piece was like controlled. It was like, you guys need to back off. You're getting too enmeshed. You're getting too involved. Like, you don't want to be in the room. It was like, if you were in a 2-person room with somebody you started getting really close with, having a lot of sex, having a lot of intimacy, then you would probably end up being controlled and taken out of that room with that person and put in a different room.
Right.
But no, sex in and of itself, like, it was great. Like, have sex, get excited, go do some work for the community, go do something for the house. Great. Sex is great as long as it's on their terms.
And are you with your partner? I feel like we should give him a name. What's a name that's not triggering?
I won't use his actual name. I'll say his name was Seth.
Seth. Okay. So are you with Seth at this point?
No. Seth and I broke up shortly before. I was actually for a short period living at his house, or like his like in-law suite or whatever. And we broke up while I was living there. I had asked him to at least give me the status of like primary partner. I'd like to be a primary partner. And that was something, it was a very complicated situation that I couldn't, in case he would listen to this, I don't want to try to overly simplify or so I would say that, because we're not on great terms at this point, I would say that we got to the point where neither of us felt safe, and we needed to end it in order to go to try to find safety again. And so I moved into the house as a single lady. And I do think there was coercion. There was 100% coercion within the community for me to break up with him. And
right.
I mean, I literally, a member of the community told me to tell him something that would end us. And I did. And it did end us. So,
wow. Okay. Do you feel like he was feeling similar pressures on his end about not making you a primary partner, or kind of not agreeing to some of the ultimatums that you may have been presenting him with?
Good question. Probably yes. I mean, I think that he was probably getting pressure to not like dominate my experience there, and to where like they probably wanted for him to allow me to have sex with a lot of different people, to experiment and whatever. I think looking back, he probably felt pressure to do that and did not share with me how much it upset him that I was doing that. And it was only in hindsight that I really even realized he was so hurt by that. So yeah, what a like people outside their boundaries.
And you moved into the house as a single person, and you said that you're not particularly close with your family. So do you have family and friends outside of the OneTaste community that are aware of this group that you're involved in?
A few. I did. Yeah, I did tell my sister. Of course, she told my parents because she was so worried about me. And
wow. How does she say, Mom, Dad?
No, I don't even know.
Katie's involved in this group where they stroke her clitoris.
Yeah, I don't even know how she did that. To be a fly on the wall with that conversation. She maybe just told them to Google it or something, but
oh gosh, okay.
They definitely Googled it.
So you've got a few people that are aware that you're involved. I feel like that's an important question just to ask, because often when people get involved in high demand groups, they may decide to forego telling close family members and friends of their involvement in particular groups. Mm-hmm. And it's important to make sure that you are open with your family and friends about the things that you're getting involved in case you ever need them to help you no longer be involved, or be there for you when you're no longer involved. Mm-hmm. even if you don't believe that there's anything inherently evil or wrong about the group that you're getting involved in. Almost like when you're going on a blind date and you tell your friend, hey, I'm going to the charcoal grill for a date with this guy called Ted. I'll send you my location in case you never see me again. Just one of those kind of conversations to have with your family. Hey, I'm involved in this new group. They're really cool. We meet on this day and we talk about our favorite poems.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah,
yeah.
I do think that was helpful. It was helpful to have people. It was also helpful to have purpose outside, that I had a job outside of the group.
I suppose it means that you can't just exist in an alternate reality 100% of the time. If there are other people outside of the community that may have conversations with you, and obviously a job outside of that community, that means that you can't exist 100% of the time in an insular environment like this house that we're exploring a bit now.
Yeah.
And your dependency levels already sound like they're on the rise at this point in terms of moving into the house.
Oh, yeah.
Do you feel like you became restricted with your leisure time? Were you kind of restricted with who you interacted with outside of the movement? Were you sleep deprived in any way? Were there any major controlling themes that were coming through at this point that may now look like earmarks of cult-like methods of control?
Oh yeah, I wouldn't say specifically I was not permitted to talk to people outside the group. That was the only thing of what you said that I would say, it's definitely like, I will say that the group called people who were not in the group muggles, which I guess is a Harry Potter term, like people who don't have powers. And so that word was thrown around. But besides that, I did, with what little time I had, I did still, I visited my family for family reunion during that time. And that was all the way to Ohio, which is 6 hours on planes.
Oh, that's great.
Yeah. So, but yes, I was exhausted all the time. There was a pressure to get up in the morning and have your body touched sexually, which it took until 2018 or 2019 when that the Orgasm Cult podcast came out. And I think Michal was talking about the fact that she didn't want it sometimes. I was like, holy shit, neither did I. Neither did I. I did not want that. Who wants that every single morning or Monday through Friday?
I mean, there's probably all sorts of people listening that are thinking, when their partner wakes up in the morning, they're like, hey, and you're like, no. Yeah, no, it's not. You can't always be in the headspace where you want your body touched.
Yes.
in oh gosh, it must be, to force yourself to go through that must just be then kind of taking away the empowerment and more kind of then bringing in negative associations with clitoral stimulation around oh God, I feel lethargic and I feel tired and groggy, and just associating all those things you feel when you first wake up in the morning with then having your clitoris stimulated.
Yeah, wow. I didn't even think about it that way. The first thing in the morning, I do know for years, the first thing in the morning was there's just practice time. I had to do practices in the morning, and after I stopped oming, I was I still had to do practices, otherwise I would not survive spiritually. I would be asleep. I would be a shell of a human. And I think that's one of those things. At that point I started saying oming's like brushing my teeth. They're really the same, pretty much the same thing. And it's that was pretty true on some level. But that should never, ever be true. That should never, ever be a thing.
I can't remember specifically the events that took place around me brushing my teeth today. Did I start here or did I start here? And how long did I brush my teeth for? Like, you should never get into a position where you're like, I can't remember the specifics of my practice session this morning. And it's clever that it's done first thing in the morning, because if you've had a good rest and a good night's sleep, you're waking up and you're being thrown straight into your practices. So there is no time to follow a doubt, to let a thought blossom into something more than just a niggle at the back of your mind. There's no space for you to distance yourself from OneTaste. It's just, everything is just from the minute you wake up until the minute you go to sleep. It's everything focused around the group. So of course there's no chance for you to take a step back and really question what is going on. Especially once you're in the house and everybody's just, it's all everybody's talking about or practicing or striving for the next level and doing their coaching program with other people in the house, there's just so much that goes kind of from this point onwards. Do you ever visit the New York or San Francisco groups, or do they visit you? Is it kind of like you mingle and have a chance to connect?
Yeah, I definitely, because my coaching program was in New York, I visited New York 10 times for that and I chose to stay in their house. Usually there was a house in Brooklyn, which Ruan where he lived. And so that would happen. And also people would come through and visit. Also, if I was going to any other city to visit and there was an Ohm house there, you're always welcome there. So yeah, there is a lot of international even connection with other people who own.
And did you cross paths with Ruan at the times that you would visit New York? Wow, that's just so interesting.
Yeah, definitely. He was actually in what's called production, which is like the team that runs the event. He did some production at my coaching program. So yeah, I knew of him. Yeah.
And in your correspondence with me, when we were kind of doing the pre-interview preparation, you mentioned something in your writing that happened to you whilst you were living in the house around Seth and his involvement with somebody else that was quite distressing for you. Yeah. Would you say that this was a key turning point in your OneTaste journey, or were things already on the turn before this event happened?
I would say it was an initiation into living in the house, because it happened just a couple of weeks after I moved into the house. Yeah.
Okay. So just talk the listeners through the events that played out. That's horrible if that's the case.
Oh yeah, absolutely. It was a horrible experience. Basically, we had an event. I think it was a turn on, and at the time, so we were headed back from the turn on, and I was driving in the car with one of the people that I lived in a room with. So I lived in the quad, which there was 4 people in that room, and she was one of the other people in that room. And she mentioned on the way back that she wanted to have sex in the house with Seth now, and that they talked, and that was the plan. And it was late. I had to work in the morning. We share the same room. And I was like, I would rather he did not live there. He lived in his own house. So I said, I would prefer that you do that at his house. And she said, no, that's not what's going to happen.
Oh, gosh. Oh.
And by the way, she's since apologized sincerely for this.
Right. Yeah.
And then I got to the house and he was there, and I tried to sit down in the Ohm room with him, and I said, don't do this. And he said, you don't own my sex. And I jumped up, I called him an asshole, I stormed out, and I just ran out of the house, and I just ran into and I was still wearing the skimpy dress, short dress and heels that you would wear to turn on as a leader. And I was running through the streets at probably 10 p.m. and just trying to get away from the house and feeling really trapped, because it was I got to go home and I got to get up for work tomorrow, and my home is no longer a safe place. Like, this is not okay.
And I suppose at this point you're feeling like you have no other choice but to return to the house.
Yeah.
Oh,
yeah.
That's horrible.
Yeah. I had waited, and I don't even know if they waited too, if they were trying. I was not really answering my phone at that point. But yeah, I definitely, like, isn't it safe out there? Looking how I looked in the streets of Austin, like, it was not safe. So I went home, and I basically, they were not in my room, but I basically listened to them having sex for a while and laughing.
God, that's
and like,
horrible.
It's horrible. It's so traumatic, Casey. Like, that shit is so traumatic. And I got really pissed about it. And the next day I was very angry, and I was shamed for that. I was told, you do not shame another woman's sex. And I shut down at that point. There was no other option but to just deal with that sort of thing.
That's awful. And if it was done on an initiation basis, it makes me wonder if it was purposefully fed down from leadership as instructions on maybe how to break a person's will down, to create sort of more of a switched off robotic response from people, or to inflict that level of trauma when there's a certain level of dependency on the group at that point, or if it was just a combination of things that created that sequence of events, and it's not as evil as I'm kind of explaining it to be now. But again, it sounds so similar to what Nicola talked about in her book A Slice of Orange, where she had a boyfriend who she loved dearly, and they weren't allowed to practice monogamy when they followed Bhagwan Sri Rajneesh. They would be, as you put it, they would be labeled or they would be spoken to in a negative way, that it was something that they were doing wrong. They were trying to stop other people's progress in a certain way, or they were trying to restrict people because of their feelings and their emotions, and you weren't allowed to be individualized in that way or selfish in that way. And so when her boyfriend was having relations with other people, and they were coming up to her and saying, wow, your boyfriend's really good in bed, and she would say, yeah, I know. Like, we had this really lengthy discussion in our interview about how some cultures may practice polyamory, but in my nature it doesn't feel natural. It doesn't feel like you can't, it doesn't feel like there's a situation where I wouldn't get caught up in my thoughts and feelings. And I know that there are people in our culture that practice polyamory, and I hope that it's in a consensual and safe space where none of these things that we're discussing now ever happen to another person, because what you've experienced there is like truly heartbreaking, where you feel so trapped that you have no other alternative but to go and sit in that environment where you can hear what's happening around you. That's just so awful.
Yeah. And I don't think that anybody did that on purpose necessarily. And I think it was sort of like, if you're going to live here, this is what you need to be able to tolerate this.
And what's your journey like onwards after this point? Is your relationship with the community soured from this point, or is it something that you write off and throw yourself further into the OneTaste work?
It's probably something in between those. I definitely, I took it as like, this is the reality. If I want to do this, if I want to have this, if I want to grow, if I want to heal, that's so ironic that I would say that. If I want to heal, then these are going to have to be the realities of my living space now. And what was so difficult was that there was one of my close friends who was in leadership. When I came into the community, she was dating one man, and then a new man came to town, and she ended it with that man and started dating this man. they were all living together through that. And it was like watching them do that. It was seamless. It was relatively seamless. Like the guy she had just broken up with seemed cool with it, super cool with it. And there were a number of people in the community that in that house that seemed totally like turned on even by their partners having sex with other women. And maybe that's just what was happening more so in public, but nobody was having the reactions that I was having to these open relationship situations where I didn't feel safe. Like I felt like I was losing my mind. I was losing my grip. And I really wasn't seeing that reflected in other people's behaviors, that was like, okay, this is a me thing, not a them, whoever's hurting me thing. Like this is a me thing.
I was going to ask if you kind of felt like it was just you, or if people were perhaps potentially masking their true thoughts and feelings because they didn't want to get that kind of pushback from the group, or the negative labels that would be applied to somebody who was trying to, restrict somebody's sexual encounters.
I honestly don't know. I mean, in the years since one thing that I've thought of is attachment wounds. It's like my attachment wounds are very abandonment based. Other people's attachment wounds are more like smothering based. So they actually feel better when they have when their partner is having sex with somebody else, so they don't feel smothered by them. I don't know what it was exactly, but that's, I was one of the outliers. I think like I had one of the biggest reactions of the small group of people here that that I compared myself to.
And how far into your 5-year tenure are you at this point where this event happens?
Not quite 1 year yet.
Oh my goodness. Yeah. I thought you were going to say maybe like 3 or 4 years. Ooh. So you have like another 4 or so years in this group after this event happened.
Yes. And 2 more open relationships that start with the man saying, this is going to be an open relationship. I'm not going to have a monogamous relationship with you. I will be with you. Both of them were willing to be my primary partner. Neither of them were willing to have a monogamous relationship. And I kept trying.
Oh, this is horrible. This is horrible. All of these things that individuals may experience outside of the OneTaste community feels like it's now happening inside, but like exacerbated because so much focus is placed on the orgasmic meditation practice itself.
Right. Yeah, I mean, there was definitely a lot of trauma. I'd say for everybody, there was trauma that was happening along with any growth and healing that was happening. I think we've all had to, those of us who've really gone back and reflected and want to move on, and that's definitely not everybody. I would say we've had to heal from the trauma that's happened, but also love some of the growth that happened. It's very confusing.
Yeah.
There are definitely people who would say they weren't traumatized, more so like the people who are probably at the top of the food chain. Sure.
So this is like 1 year in.
Oh, I haven't even talked about all the trauma from the first year.
Oh gosh. Yes. And you're involved for another 4 years, and you're waking up every day and you're going through the orgasm meditation practice every single day for 5 years.
Yes. Yeah.
Okay. And what do these 4 years look like? I just can't, this is wild. Like,
yeah, I would say like the first year was intense. And some of the things about that first year were like really easy healing. Like it was like stuff that was ready to heal. I just needed the right place to do it. And I was able to grow in certain ways that first year. There was also a bunch of trauma that first year. There was a bunch of trauma the whole way through. Going into like the second year was when the company boomed. So the company made like the Forbes list of like 11th like the 11th fastest growing small company. And then all of a sudden, my ex now, he started a house, and then staff wanted to go start a house of their own for like the real, like the real people who are really quote unquote devoting their lives to orgasm. The people who want space to do that 24/7, basically. So now we have 3 houses. There would later be 4 houses. And so I'm moving around. After my coaching program ended, I took a way back seat. I was like, this is too much. And I moved into my ex's home, and where he lived with his now girlfriend. Which was actually fine. Like I was past it. Somehow miraculously I was past it, and we were able to be friends at that point. And then that was another year. And then the community was like, there was just some faltering going on in the community. I don't even remember what it was. But there was a split that was happening, and my house was becoming like anti-OneTaste. And I was very adamant, like I was very protective of I wanted to protect like mama, the mama part of this operation. And so I was definitely combative with them, and I was like, I'm leaving, I'm going back to the other house to support them and keep this thing afloat. So I did that. I became more of a leader in that house, but things were changing, and it was different, and it was less, the staff was not there. So it was like more toned down. It was less structure, which bothered me sometimes. And I would say I became more of a leader. And I would say at some points I was heavy-handed and was becoming, I was trying to keep something going that I was taught. And there are things about that I regret. I regret interactions with people when I came down hard on them, or I was just kind of needlessly trying to be rigid, just for rigidity's sake. And yeah, I think at some point in that, I started a new relationship. I brought somebody new into the community. We started a relationship, and that ended up lasting for like 1.5 years. And that last chapter, he was my last chapter of that experience. And so when he and I ended, I officially left. I had actually left the house 6 months before that because I couldn't live with him. He wasn't willing to be monogamous at all, or even ethically non-monogamous. And the house at that point, it was a lot of sex workers who were, it was a completely different scene. It was like a bunch of sex workers and him, and then a non-ethically non-monogamous person who had just moved in. They had more experience. And my life was so traumatic at that point. Like I couldn't get away from the trauma, even living all the way across town. And so eventually I was able to leave that relationship, which meant I could not go back in with any of those people because they all had sexual relationships with him, or could. And that helped me get out, because I was like, I really can't. Like I literally need to get to a place of safety at this point. And that the only way to do that was to get out of that relationship and get out of that community.
Wow. Oh my goodness. So pretty significant 4 years. Like it's kind of there's probably just as much to discuss in the other 4 years as there is to discuss in the first year, even though we've missed stuff out of discussing discussion points in the first year. And something that I was going to ask you about OneTaste is, do you feel like it was inevitable the like sex workers would end up living in the house, or that this would invite a certain clientele in? How do you keep something that involves sexual practices, even if it's not being done in a necessarily sexual way, with the orgasm meditation? Well, how do you stop that from spiraling into something like what you've just explained?
I mean, I definitely, over the years, I mean, I saw plenty of people turn to sex work just to pay for classes, to pay for how expensive it was to be a part of that group. And I've heard Nicole tell people that in order to pay for classes, they should engage in sex work. I've literally heard her in the same room say that. So, and, you know, the person who had sex with Seth in the house, like, she was also a sex worker. So it was happening. It was already happening before that. And, you know, I think I have the privilege of having been given access to education, and a higher education that enabled me to get a license and a career that's good, well paying. And some women are not. And if you want to do something like this that's expensive, or really, you know, just have the means to live an independent life, that is what many women choose to do. And so that was, in the beginning, I would say the women who were doing that were just trying to be independent and live a quality of life. They were trying to, and they didn't have the same, you know, they didn't have the same start that I did. But over time, I think what happened was there was kind of like one sex worker in the community who was making her own side business out of it,
right,
and was in you know, basically getting other people to she's trying to get out of it, like everybody's trying to do, trying to get out of it the only way you know how. And so
it's tough, isn't it?
Yeah, I have a lot of empathy, and I don't understand enough about it to speak, you know, to necessarily speak about it in an educated way.
It's, I guess that answer gives me enough insight to realize that there were people that were abusing the system that was in place, but there were also some people that were relying on the system to get by, to provide for themselves in a certain way. I just worry that those types of environments, I mean, I say that like it's typical to find this type of environment. Of course it's not, because I've never come across another group that's exactly like OneTaste. We've mentioned Zendik Farm being quite similar with their take on sex and relationships. I don't know if I'm thinking like the Children of God in the back of my head, and how that situation with the flirty fishing that they encouraged, where women were encouraged to go out and proselytize to men using their bodies, which basically just meant prostituting themselves for God, as it was kind of written in one of the letters that came down from leadership. It does perhaps pave the way for people that might identify as pimps to get involved and take advantage of the situation. I don't know if I'm just kind of playing devil's advocate in thinking about the worst scenarios that could come out of a group that focuses on stimulating the woman's body in such a raw and open way.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I mean, at the end of the day, OneTaste was a multi-level marketing thing, and sex was all interwoven in that. So yeah, that totally lends itself to the creation of sex work, as well as finding a multi-level way to create that.
But I suppose the absolute worst part of this is that the matriarch is encouraging women to put themselves in those situations, to continue taking part in the events of the OneTaste community. That to me is kind of, I guess, what I meant at the start of the episode when I said that Nicole goes full circle with experiencing her own sexual trauma and then founding the OneTaste community and then encouraging women to potentially put themselves in situations where they too may experience sexual trauma.
Yeah. And I think most of us did. Most of us women, and then the men were kind of encouraged to act in ways that created that, perpetrating that or experiencing it. I don't know. I'm sure that happened as well.
So you mentioned there that the last relationship that you had within the community before you decided to walk away completely was with somebody that you had recruited into the community. So was this a common practice in OneTaste? Were you taught how to recruit people, or was it just an expectation that you would go out and find people to bring into the fold?
It was kind of an expectation. I was definitely not one of the people who was recruited into that role. There were definitely a ton of people who were in sales. I'm not salesy. I'm not into that. And I was put in production because I'm structured and organized and responsible. So that just happened. I met him on a dating app and he had already heard of it. And he was like, yes, was not ready for it then. I'm ready for it now. Let's do this. And just like dove in head first, just like I did a few years before that. Mm-hmm.
Right. So at this point, you've progressed from using platforms like Meetup to dating apps and websites, which I actually was going to mention, that I know that some Jehovah's Witnesses and other religious groups use dating apps to kind of, throw the hook, the bait, carrot.
Yeah.
What?
I think no, totally. I think there are definitely people who are doing that. I personally was pretty ambivalent about him coming into the community, to be completely honest. Like, I wanted him to grow, but I honestly didn't want to bring him in there. It was an open relationship nightmare. Like, I wanted him to myself. So I was on those apps to have other relationships outside of the community, for God's sake.
Do you feel like there was more cognitive dissonance there with the kind of two ideas fighting against one another, where you're like, I do want to recruit people because I know that that's good for the community, but also you're not ready to come into the OneTaste community because you're not ready, because it's not good here, or it's not for you. It's not. Do you feel like that was something you experienced?
I still believed that it was the way to freedom. And I also not selfishly, but at the time I felt selfishly. It's like, I would rather have somebody to myself. I'd rather have a mainstream relationship. And that's really where I was heading. That's really what I needed and still need, is just a normal freaking relationship where there's safety.
Absolutely. And I think that is not even something that people should feel lucky to have. It's something that should exist in all relationships, whether they are monogamous or polyamorous, in whichever way you would define your relationships with people. They should always be safe and respectful. That is what should be normalized in my partner is incredible at really sharing the role of parenthood. And he actually really likes to take the kids out and have, one-to-one time with them. And he really strives to give me time to do my podcast work, to get exercise in. And I try to do the same for him when he's not working, because of course he has a full-time job on top of all of those things I just mentioned, with him trying to pursue his projects and his fitness. And people always say to me, oh, you're so lucky he does the amount that he does. And he hates it when people say that, because he's like, I'm just doing what any other parent should do. And he's 100% on the money when he says that. So, you know, people are, oh, you're so lucky that he does everything. And then I say, well, he wouldn't agree with you there. He would just say that he's doing what he should do. Oh, but you're lucky that he thinks that way. So there's just no way around it. But yes,
it's just, what a sad world it is when you're so lucky to have that. It's like, why that should be a norm. That's
you're so right. Yeah, absolutely. So I guess that leads us on to the last sort of section of our discussion, is to talk about your life since you left the community. What happened to the community itself? I believe that it's not in existence anymore. I think Ruan mentioned something about Nicole selling the business. So I think that there's been a lot of shifts and changes since your departure from the group. So I wondered if you could just talk us all through your exit and what that looked like.
Yeah, I think Nicole sold the company to a number of co-owners who are like wealthy in 2017-ish, and that was my fourth year. That was my fourth year there. And you know, I think that was kind of like the beginning of the end. And you know, it was clear that she was also really triggered by having a relationship with somebody who she brought into the community and began having sex with her friends. That was finally out there. Like, that was finally put out there, and she left shortly thereafter. Right. And then, you know, at some point there was a Bloomberg published an expose on the group, and there was an FBI investigation. The FBI came into kind of like the headquarters at that point and seized people's cell phones and laptops and all of that. I knew some friends who were involved in that, and probably have a trauma bond, because those are the folks who are still going. The group is still going. It's just last time I checked, it's called the Ohm Institute.
Right.
Yeah. And so, geez, things shut down on the local level, houses closed on the local level, and I began putting more attention I began putting more attention on my life and my business, which I had that whole time. Oh, it became so clear to me that I could make so much more money by being able to focus on my, actually make an income, the income that I needed by focusing on my business. And so, you know, I healed I'm still healing financially, but to be able to back away and put my attention on my life, which I wasn't able to do for more than 4 years. Everything changed drastically for me at that point. And I'm definitely I'm definitely not talking to many of the people in the group, which I think a lot of us are kind of like, maybe there are a couple people in our circles that we still see. There's still in Austin, there's still a women's group that I think is still kind of doing its thing in a different way. They've invited me and I'm not interested. And yeah, I think at the corporate level or at the headquarters level, people are still trying to sell this thing.
Wow.
Which is frustrating to me. Like, I wish people would let it die. Like, it had to die for me. I had to get completely away from it in order to get myself back and get back in like the reality of life.
Mm-hmm.
But you know, there's still, you know, the group is still trying to save people, and Nicole, as far as I can tell, is taking zero responsibility. The other corporate head honchos, both of the Rachels in particular, I would say Rachel Cherwitz in particular, I think caused a lot of trauma to people, a lot of financial trauma, a lot of emotional trauma. Saw it myself and to me. I don't feel that anybody has really taken any responsibility for the damages that have been done, mostly financially. Here in Austin, Seth's sister definitely is, she's incredibly wealthy, and she owned the affiliate here. She paid me, when I was on staff, she paid me $500 a month for basically working. I was probably working 100 hours a week.
Oh gosh, oh my goodness.
For that alone. Yeah. So, I remember her saying when she sold the affiliate back that she broke even. And this is somebody who had like a custom made home. Her brother has a custom made home. Neither of them need to work a day for the rest of their lives. And I feel very angry about the people who have financial burdens for the rest of their lives who like never recover. And she, I remember her saying I broke even, and it did not bother me then as much as it bothers me now to understand the fallout from that. I finally, I think it was in February, I paid my last payment. I had to consolidate my debt because I went into, oh God, $40,000 worth of debt.
Wow, oh
just
my
for classes
goodness.
alone.
Oh.
Yeah. So, yeah, I'm happy to say that I'm done with that. I was so happy to be done with that debt, but still a huge cleanup process. So I just want to say that because I know the people who listen to this, many of them will never have the same financial opportunities as people who have gotten to spend their money on their own stuff their whole adult lives.
Yeah, and that's a huge financial burden, which of course every time the money comes out, or every time you need to make sure that you're making enough money to repay those payments, you're reminded of the reason why you're making those repayments in the first place. And everything that I spoke to Janice Selby about when a counselor for religious trauma, she was talking about the anger that people feel when they come out of these movements because of things like the sunk cost fallacy, because of everything that you've put into this group financially, emotionally, physically, time,
sexually.
5 years is a significant amount of time to put into this group, and not just to put into it, but you moved in, you devoted your entire life and everything to this practice. So of course you're going to feel angry at the people that benefited from the trauma and abuse that the others went through, and everything else that we've discussed in this episode today, and all of the stuff that we haven't had a chance to discuss in this episode. So not only have you got this kind of financial burden and reminder of everything that you went through, but you've also got the anger and the trauma and the emotional things that you're trying to go through. So without the debt, there's still so much to deconstruct and unpack and heal from and understand. The financial stuff on top of that is probably, and I'm confident to say it most likely has been, the difference between life or death for some people that are involved in high demand groups. The financial strain on top of everything else, it probably has been a factor that has caused somebody to either successfully end their life or attempt to. Great that you've finally been able to pay that off, but so frustrating that you were in that position to begin with.
And then nobody's taking any accountability or responsibility. I'm just one. I think there were 18 coaching programs. So that's $10,000 from, 150 people, 18 times. Or maybe even 100. We'll just say 100 to be safe. I don't even do math well, but you can imagine that's an enormous amount of money, and that nobody is taking any responsibility for that. Sucks. I hate that. I hate it for my friends who are in worse shape than I am financially. And just, that anger is still there. And luckily I have been able to focus. I've been able to get some healthcare, and I can focus on I'm with an individual therapist always. I have an individual therapist I see every week. And now I have a group therapy that I do, which is so helpful because it is an environment where my cult stuff gets triggered all the time. But it's an environment where I can say, this feels culty in this moment, this dynamic is going on right now. This feels culty. And the people around me will listen and they will adjust themselves if they are doing something that's coercive or controlling or manipulative. And that's the difference between, you know, a high demand group and a group that's just being a group and it just went off the rails a little bit. And now it's going to come back and everybody's being taken care of.
And the insight that you have into that world of coercion and manipulation is perhaps stopping some of these groups from turning into potentially one of those types of environments. So that's kind of like a full circle, really interesting thing that would probably take us a really long time to unpack in itself, just as a small little detail. But I just think that it's incredible that you were able to hold on to your own business the entire time, no matter how strong your dependency was on the group, how much pressure you were feeling from the group to be further involved, to throw more money down on more courses and more coaching, to be involved with partners who didn't want to be monogamous, to go through that repeated trauma of those things, all of this stuff that you've explored in this episode, to hold on to your own business throughout all of that and still have it on the other side is a monumentous achievement, because I imagine there must have been times where you thought, it's in the way, I'm just going to focus on OneTaste, you know, my business and the time I'm putting into it. I could, you know, move up the ladder in OneTaste and get employed and paid that way. I'm sure that crossed your mind at some point. The fact that you have your practice now that's completely yours, that has nothing to do with OneTaste, that you can accredit entirely on yourself solely, is absolutely incredible. And I hope that you recognize that on the outside of everything else that's happened, when you feel kind of those flushes of anger and you go through some of the events that took place, or some of the things that you were coerced into during your time. After all of that, there's one thing that they didn't take from you, one thing that you never gave up on, and that was your own business that is yours. I just think that's great.
Yeah. Thank you. That's true. It's so true. Thank you for reminding me.
It's just, I just love having conversations with people when they say, these things happened, now I have my PhD. And I'm like, oh my goodness, all of these things happened and I still have my business. I just think that's absolutely incredible. And I'm really thankful for your time today. I know that it's probably, I don't know how it feels for you, but for people to talk about their bodies in such ways, it's probably not something that's comfortable for many people. And I know that it's a difficult 5 years that you went through. So I really do appreciate you giving us your time, coming here to give us your insight into these experiences. I'm sure there's so much that you've given in this episode that others can take with them as either red flags for groups that they are involved in, or groups that they may come across, or groups that loved ones might be involved in, and some steps on how to manage those traumatic events on the other side, when people do find their way out of these types of high demand groups to access therapy, if you're able to, in the way that you have, and just to know that there is a world where people can express themselves sexually, and it doesn't have to be taboo, but it's a very fine line between empowering women and traumatizing women.
Yes. And I think one of the reasons why this fringe group exists and why it goes too far and all of that is because we don't know how to just talk about sex amongst women, or from mother to daughter, or from sister to sister. We don't know how to do that, and we have to do that better. We have to open up about what's happening, and as mothers, we have to talk about it, or give our daughters a name of somebody that they can talk to. So we can say, like, I'm not satisfied in sex, or sex hurts me, or like, I am not attracted to this person, or this person pushed me too far, but it wasn't rape, but it didn't feel right. You know, we need to be able to talk about that better. And, you know, it takes a lot of courage, but just like my experience with having that first OM, if you do it in a safe space, you can keep doing it. It will open up the world for you to just be able to talk about sex, about your body, about relationship, the hard stuff.
I think you're just, really so right with everything that you've just said. And I'm thinking there about conversations that my mum never had with me. And then I'm thinking about conversations that I should prepare myself for to have with my daughter, who's not even one yet, but I'm already thinking, oh, but yes, you are right. Of course, the OneTaste community is probably primarily attracted to people who are like, wow, I've never experienced just this. I've never just experienced an environment where people are trying to be in tune with their bodies in a sexual way. So
experiencing pleasure, women experiencing pleasure, and women saying, do this a little to the left, softer, you know, never mind, I want to end this, you know, like all of these things. Women don't get conditioned to say any of that, do any of that.
No, absolutely not. So there's the sex side of things, but there's also the relationship side of things as well that I feel people don't discuss or talk about enough. So more education, more sex and relationship education, and positive conversations around sex positivity and female empowerment. And that's our big takeaway from today's episode. And I love it, and I'm here for it. Great. Okay, so thank you so much for your time today, Katie. Thank you for coming and opening up to us and giving us an insight into all of these things. And I really hope that you enjoy the rest of your day.
Thank you so much, Casey, for all you do here. It's wonderful.
Take care, Katie. Bye.
You too. Bye.
That is the end of this week's episode. If you'd like to get in touch, you can find me at cultvaultpodcast@gmail.com or follow me on Twitter and Instagram @cultvaultpod. I am your speaker, Casey, host of the Cult Vault podcast.